Darkness loomed over the United States with World War II. On December 7, 1941, the Empire of Japan launched an attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. In the months following, on February 19, 1942, Executive Order 9066 was issued by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was advised and motivated by politicians and military officials to act. They ordered Japanese and Japanese Americans to be rounded up and evacuated from their homes, to be taken to internment camps as a result of war hysteria and racial prejudice. For those who made it to America, lingering resentment culminated after Pearl Harbor. 2/3 incarcerated were native-born citizens. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, U.S. citizens feared another attack and war hysteria ensued the country. State representatives put pressure on President Roosevelt to take action against those of Japanese descent living in the United States. A lot of people were fearful that citizens of Japanese ancestry would act as spies or savages for the Japanese government. The feelings that led to the internment were there long before the attack. Before Asian immigrants were viewed as economic threats, Japanese Americans were limited to a few possessions and were usually given 48 hours to evacuate their homes. Some had 7 to 10 days if they were lucky to pack with them their belongings that would fit inside a suitcase and everything they could possibly bring with them, as they had to get rid of everything else. Consequently, people seeking fortunes from them got what they wanted for cheap, since everyone was trying to steal their belongings in stores.
Santa Anita racetrack was converted into an internment camp that would hold thousands of barracks. When they got to the relocation camps, they had their family number tags, and that's what got them where they needed to be and to keep their children with them, along with being tracked by camp officials. It was really cruel and harsh to pack, and having to evacuate in 48 hours was an impossibility.
Joseph Yoshisuke Kurihara, a Japanese American, spoke of the terminal island evacuation, saying that seeing mothers completely bewildered with children crying for want and peddlers taking advantage and offering prices next to robbery made me feel like murdering those responsible without the slightest compunction in my heart. Many innocent people were detained because of Japanese descent.
My mom's family, so they are the Kawasaki's, and she was 9, but she was 13 when she came out of camp, because they went into high school when they went to Cleveland. But so it was my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom. She had one brother, John, and then she had the younger brother who was born while they were taking the dad, my mom, and her brother. So my uncle Stephen was actually born when they took the rest of them to Santa Anita racetrack. And they, my grandmother came from the hospital. You're in the hospital, then they take you, your new baby, all your things, and they send you to horse stalls. And they went from there to Arkansas, to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. But that's where they ended up, and that's where they stayed until they left and then went to Cleveland, Ohio. My mother's experience in camp was one where she felt happy. She felt like when you live your life, there are pressures of every day, like going to school, getting your homework, paying the bills, going to the grocery, doing all those things that you have to do. And I think what happened in camp, all that went away. From the children's perspective, they were living like this kind of different life. But they did eventually have schools, and what's interesting about Heart Mountain was the farming. That, because the Japanese are known for their work in agriculture, and so how they made these farms, it was like a desert, and they created farms and they grew their own produce, and they had, they made their lives better. Even though it was, they were in jail, they were in prison. I think it's funny that the government always wants to call them relocation camps. And it's like, no, they didn't go there willingly. So they went to school. They set up school, so she had to go to class. But it sounds like they had a lot of time to go out and explore. Heart Mountain was a land, pretty much lived on and cultivated by the Native Americans until expansion. But I remember she talking about going into caves and, just kind of, because, yeah, exploring. She was living in Los Angeles. So think of being in a city and in a house and, streetcars and things. And all of a sudden, they're like out in the country.
What were the living situations at that barn?
So they were called barracks, and I think every barrack had 4 units, and it depended on how many children you had as to the units. So they basically had like a coal stove, and then I think she and her brother may have shared beds, but everybody made their own space. Like you see pictures where they put like a clothesline and they put like a sheet up so that there could be a place to sleep and a place to sit. Because they didn't really have like a kitchen. Everything was in like a cafeteria. They had to go out, like in the winter, put their coats on and walk down to the bathroom. My grandfather, he worked in commissary or something where all the products came in, and he helped distribute, but he would get like scraps of wood after they made things, and so he made furniture. So they had like a dresser he made for them to put their things in, and a table and a little bench, and he was very handy that way.
Come first serve, right?
I don't know the exact process, but the quality of the food was very poor. And it was because if you're having a war, certain things are being rationed. But the other thing is you took a population that had a very specific diet. Rice, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, meat, things like that, fish. And the people who were designing this, they didn't know that. And so they made them rice with stewed tomatoes, stewed tomato out of a can on top. That was their dinner. So as time went on, the Japanese said, hey, we can do better. And that's when they started cultivating. But their meat, interestingly enough, was Spam. What was interesting when we were growing up, my mom, but in camp, they gave them canned meat all the time. They didn't, until the camp started growing their own until they had their own herds. They did pork, chicken, but until that time, they just had canned meat. And so my mom, when she was older, she liked Spam. So at Heart Mountain, there were 10,000 people. There was only a little over 1,000, I think, that lived in the town of Cody.
Knock Knock by Grace Morizawa. Auntie Junko said they came 6 p.m., December 7th, 1941. 2 tall men in long overcoats and hats stood in the doorway. Mr. Ikea, Mr. Kaji Ikea? No time to say goodbye to his beloved wife who was taking a bath. No time to get his toothbrush. 1,173 issei picked up that day. 17,000 in all. 1/3 of the first generation men, priests, teachers, community leaders imprisoned, disappeared. Keiji Ikia, found to be intelligent, well-liked, a leader, a member of the Methodist Church, interned without his family, interned, denied rehearings, interned, never seen again by Auntie Junko. They didn't know there were informants decades before, surveillance records, secret lists, potentially dangerous. Into the middle of the night. They didn't know their successes meant they were enemy aliens. Jerked from camp to camp, Tuna Canyon, Missoula, Santa Fe, Honolulu, Ellis Island. Can you hear it? Can you hear it now?
On August 10, 1988, Ronald Reagan would sign the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, paying reparations to each victim of internment. No payment can make up for those lost years, so what is most important has less to do with property than honor. For here we have made a wrong. Here we affirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law. Ronald Reagan.
This is Jenny Walsh, a freshman at Assumption University. To begin, do you happen to know anything about Japanese internment? Anything at all from your general knowledge?
From my general awareness, I know that the day after the surprise assault on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. declared war on Japan, which entered into World War II.
Yes, that is correct. Can you tell me why knowing and understanding Japanese internment is important?
I personally believe that it is crucial because, due to its history, Japanese internment camps are known to be one of the most crucial violations of American civil rights.
To conclude this short history synopsis video, we hope we educated you more of the significance and historic importance of Japanese internment camps. To summarize, Japanese internment camps were established during World War II by President Franklin Roosevelt through his Executive Order 9066. It is important to comprehend and recognize that Japanese internment was a very real event in history because it was the policy of the United States government that the people of Japanese descent would be interned in isolated camps. The Japanese internment camps are one of the most brutal violations of American civil rights in the 20th century. They began rounding up people after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The action of the camps was a culmination of the federal government's history of racist and discriminatory treatment of Asian immigrants and their descendants. We remember those who were affected and/or lost their lives to this uncivil and tragic incarceration in American World War II history.